Close your eyes for a moment and imagine you're holding a cup. Warm ceramic rests against your palms, and from its rim rises a gentle curl of steam. The air is filled with a fragrance that is at once bitter, earthy, and faintly sweet. That fragrance is coffee, a companion so ordinary to us now that we rarely pause to consider how far it has travelled, or how many centuries have shaped its journey. Yet behind this familiar cup lies a story as winding as the rivers of Ethiopia, where its legend first begins. We start in the highlands, where the air is thin and the soil is dark and fertile. Here, among goats and herdsmen, the wild coffee plant grew unnoticed for millennia. Its berries, deep red when ripe, seemed unremarkable until, so the story goes, a shepherd named Kaldi watched his goats leap and prance after chewing them. Curious, he tried them himself and felt an unusual wakefulness take hold. Whether this tale is truth or folklore, it captures something essential. Coffee has always been a drink of energy, a spark to the weary mind. From these mountains, coffee drifted into human ritual. By the 15th century in Yemen, Sufi mystics prepared a dark, bitter brew from roasted beans. In dim chambers lit by oil lamps, they sipped from simple clay cups to sustain themselves through long nights of prayer. To them, coffee was not just refreshment, it was devotion, a way of keeping the body awake while the soul sought communion with the divine. Picture those early gatherings, the rhythmic chanting, the low murmur of recitation, the steady clink of cups set down on stone floors. The bitterness of the drink was softened by purpose. A single plant, once ignored in the wild, had become a bridge between the earthly and the spiritual. From Yemen's port of Mocha, a name still tied to coffee today, the beans began to travel outward. Ships carried them across the Red Sea into Cairo, Damascus, and Istanbul. By the 16th century, coffee had leapt from the cloisters of the devout to the bustling streets of great cities. There, in the smoke and chatter of the first coffeehouses, it took on a new life. But before we step into those lively halls, let us linger for one more moment with this cup in your hands. Notice how even now, in your own world, it still carries a sense of ritual. The morning pause, the break from work, the quiet comfort of sipping while thoughts drift. Coffee is at once ancient and immediate, sacred and ordinary. It is the same drink that stirred goats in Ethiopia, sustained mystics in Yemen, and fueled conversations in cities half a world away. This is where our journey begins, with a simple cup, warm against your palms, connecting you to centuries of human history. The story of coffee begins in legend, somewhere between memory and myth. Long before cafes filled city streets, the plant grew wild in the misty highlands of Ethiopia. The tale most often told is of a young goat herd named Kaldi. One evening he noticed his goats leaping, kicking and dancing after chewing on the bright red cherries of a certain bush. Curious, he plucked a handful for himself, chewed, and soon felt a surge of restless energy. His fatigue vanished, his eyes sharpened, and the night seemed alive with possibility. Kaldi carried his discovery to the nearby monastery, eager to share this strange gift of the earth. But the monks were suspicious. Bitter and strange, the cherries were tossed into the fire. Yet as they burned, the air filled with a fragrance unlike anything they had ever known. Rich, deep, and strangely inviting. The monks raked the roasted seeds from the ashes, ground them, and stirred them into hot water. What they tasted was not only unusual but transformative. A drink that cleared the mind and kept them alert through long hours of prayer. This story may be folklore, embroidered over centuries, yet it carries a truth within it. Coffee's earliest use was tied not to idle pleasure, but to focus, endurance, and the pursuit of something higher. In the 15th century, this truth was embraced in Yemen, where Sufi mystics perfected the brewing of coffee. They roasted the beans carefully, ground them fine, and simmered them slowly in water. In the quiet of candlelit rooms, they drank from clay cups before beginning their night vigils. Imagine yourself among them. The room hushed, save for the crackle of a lamp flame. Around you, the air is heavy with incense and the earthy scent of boiling beans. The liquid is dark, almost black, and the first sip is sharp, bitter, but strangely comforting. Soon, a warmth spreads through you, not only from the heat of the drink, but from the way your thoughts seem steadier, clearer. Hours of chanting and recitation lie ahead, yet you no longer fear fatigue. Coffee has given you stamina. For these mystics, coffee was more than a drink. It was a companion to worship, a bridge between body and spirit. They called it kahwa, a word that once meant wine. But unlike wine, which dulled the senses, qawa sharpened them. It allowed a community to stay awake deep into the night, finding devotion in every sip. From these monasteries, coffee slowly seeped outward. Traders carried it along the Red Sea routes. Pilgrims to Mecca tasted it and brought it home. In the bazaars of Arabia, it became more than a sacred drink. It was a social one. By the early 16th century, the first public coffeehouses appeared in Mecca and Cairo, offering not only steaming cups but also companionship, conversation, and a space for ideas. But in these earliest days, the drink was still cloaked in mystery. To most of the world, it remained an exotic secret, tied to rituals of faith and to stories of goats and shepherds in distant lands. No one yet imagined that centuries later it would sit on nearly every breakfast table, brewed by machines with the press of a button. For now it was a treasure of monks and merchants, a gift for staying awake when the world wished for sleep. From the hushed corners of monasteries, coffee slipped into the streets. By the early 1500s, the drink that once belonged to mystics found a new home in the bustling cities of the Middle East. Mecca, Cairo, Damascus, and especially Istanbul became centres of what would soon be called the coffeehouse culture. Step into one of these places in 16th century Cairo. The city hums with voices and the clatter of donkey hooves on stone streets. But behind a modest doorway, a different world opens. Inside, lamps flicker, casting long shadows across smoke-stained walls. Wooden benches line the room. Low tables hold steaming cups, and men gather in small clusters. The air is dense with conversation. Poetry recited from memory, debates about philosophy, gossip about merchants and rulers. At the centre of it all is the same dark liquid poured into clay bowls. These establishments were known as cafe-khane, literally houses of coffee. They were not merely places to drink, they were places to belong. Merchants paused here to rest from the market, scholars to exchange ideas, musicians to play. A cup of coffee cost only a few coins, far less than wine or feasts, and so people from many walks of life mingled together. For the first time, society had a beverage that stimulated rather than dulled, that sharpened minds instead of clouding them. The authorities did not always approve. In Mecca, imams worried that coffee gatherings might stir rebellion, since lively debates often turned toward politics. In Istanbul, sultans at times ordered coffeehouses closed, fearing the way people gathered there outside state control. But no ban ever lasted long. The lure of the drink, the pull of companionship, and the rhythm of shared stories proved stronger than decrees. Soon the bans lifted, and the coffeehouses thrived once more. Imagine the atmosphere: cups clinking, pipes smoking, the murmur of verses from poets, the laughter of men slapping the backs of their friends. One corner might host a storyteller recounting battles of Alexander the Great. Another might feature a chess match, the board lit by candlelight. All the while, servers carried brass trays laden with small cups, their surfaces reflecting the glow of the lamps. This culture of gathering around coffee changed daily life. Before, evenings were quiet, limited to family homes or religious study. Now there was a public living room, a place open to ideas and voices. A single cup could purchase entry into debates, performances, or simply the comfort of community. In many ways, these early coffeehouses resemble the cafes we know today. People came not only for the drink, but for the atmosphere, the sense of being surrounded by energy, words, and the warmth of company. Just as modern cafes host students hunched over laptops, artists sketching, and friends meeting to talk, the kahvehane of Cairo or Istanbul held its own diverse clientele. Coffee had moved from a sacred companion of worship to a social companion of daily life. No longer confined to prayer halls, it had become a current flowing through the heart of cities, linking strangers, sparking conversations, and creating the first global cafe culture. And yet, this was only the beginning. From these lively halls, the aroma of roasted beans would soon drift across the seas, carried by traders into Europe. There, a new chapter awaited, one of wonder, suspicion, and eventual transformation. From the ports of the Middle East, the beans travelled further west. By the early 17th century, merchant ships docking in Venice began to unload sacks filled with a strange, bitter-smelling cargo. Traders called it café. At first it was a curiosity, expensive, exotic, and a little suspect. Some Europeans approached it with fascination, others with fear. Step into Venice around 1615. The air is filled with the cries of gondoliers and the scent of salt from the lagoon. Alongside spices and silks from the east, small shops begin to sell a black drink served in porcelain cups. Aristocrats and merchants sample it cautiously. Its bitterness is unlike wine or ale, and yet its effect is undeniable. Alertness, a quickening of thought, a sharpness of conversation. From Venice, the habit spread quickly. Coffee houses began to open in London, Paris, and Vienna. They were unlike taverns, which left men stumbling and slurring their words. Here, the drink did the opposite. It sobered. It sharpened. In London, patrons paid a penny for a cup, and soon these establishments were nicknamed penny universities. For the price of a single coin, anyone could join the company of poets, scientists, and merchants, listening to debates and discussions that range from trade deals to philosophy. Isaac Newton and other great thinkers of the age are said to have lingered in such places, fueled by endless cups of coffee. Not everyone welcomed this new drink. Some priests condemned it as the bitter invention of Satan. Its foreign origins, its stimulating qualities, and the way it drew people into lively conversation all made it suspicious. But Pope Clement VIII is said to have tasted it himself, found it delightful, and declared that it would be a sin to let such a drink remain only in the hands of unbelievers. With that blessing, coffee's path into European life was sealed. Imagine Paris in the late 1600s, the aroma of roasted beans drifting from the Café Procope, where writers and philosophers gathered. Or Vienna, after the Ottoman siege of 1683, when sacks of abandoned coffee were left behind. Locals began to brew them, adding milk and sugar, creating a sweeter version that quickly took root in Central Europe. Out of these beginnings grew traditions still alive today. The elegant Viennese coffee house, the Parisian café, the London shop buzzing with news and trade. In these settings, coffee was more than a drink. It was a force that shifted habits and ideas. Before, much of Europe drank ale or weak beer daily, even in the mornings, since water was often unsafe. Coffee replaced these with a drink that woke the mind instead of clouding it. Writers stayed awake longer, merchants plotted deals with clearer heads, and political pamphlets were written over steaming cups. Compare this to now, when you might stroll into a cafe and see students bent over laptops, friends laughing softly, or someone quietly reading a book. The setting is familiar, though the centuries have changed the details. What was once exotic is now ordinary, but the ritual is the same. The pause in the day, the warmth of the cup, the conversation it encourages. From hesitant sips in Venice to thriving cafes in London and Paris, coffee had conquered Europe, and with Europe's growing empires it would soon be planted across the world, shaping economies, landscapes, and millions of lives. By the time coffee had settled into European life, it was no longer enough to import it in small sacks from Arabia. Demand grew too fast, cups multiplied too quickly. The wealthy wanted coffee at their tables, and the middle classes wanted it in their kitchens. The thirst of Europe would transform landscapes far beyond its borders. Colonial powers looked to their territories for cultivation. The Dutch were the first to succeed. In the late 1600s, they smuggled live coffee plants from Yemen and planted them in Java, in what is now Indonesia. The warm, humid climate proved perfect, and soon Dutch traders filled their ships with beans destined for Amsterdam and beyond. The word Java would become forever tied to coffee itself. France followed. In 1714, a coffee plant from the Royal Botanical Garden in Paris was gifted to the French Caribbean island of Martinique. From this single tree, it is said, thousands of coffee plants spread across the Americas. Soon plantations dotted the Caribbean, Brazil and Central America, worked by enslaved people whose forced labour made the European craving possible. The story of coffee, once tied to mystics and merchants, was now tied to empire and exploitation. Picture a plantation in 18th century Saint-Domingue, present-day Haiti. Rows upon rows of glossy-leaved plants stretch under the tropical sun. The air is heavy with heat and the scent of earth. Enslaved workers bend under the weight of harvest baskets, their lives bound to the rhythm of a crop they could not drink freely. For them, coffee was not ritual or refreshment, but endless toil. Yet out of this harsh system came abundance. By the late 1700s, coffee had shifted from being a luxury for aristocrats to a daily necessity for labourers in Europe. In cities like London and Paris, the morning cup became a habit across classes. Newspapers were read with coffee, workdays began with it, revolutions were whispered over it. Coffee was no longer just a drink, it was a fuel of modern life. Brazil emerged as the giant. By the 19th century, its plantations, also built on slavery until abolition, made it the world's leading producer, a title it still holds today. The sheer scale of production meant that coffee reached every corner of the world. What began as a rare, exotic import was now poured from simple tin pots in rural kitchens, from porcelain cups in aristocratic parlours, and from steaming mugs in workers' hands. But empire was not only about exploitation, it was also about connection. As beans flowed across oceans, so too did stories, rituals, and tastes. The Ottoman Empire's tiny cups and cardamom-scented brews influenced the spiced coffee of North Africa. Vienna's creamy blends gave birth to cafe culture in Central Europe. Brazil's exports fueled the rise of coffeehouses in North America. Each sip carried with it the imprint of continents. By the dawn of the 20th century, coffee had become both ordinary and extraordinary. A simple drink, yes, but one that tied together Ethiopia's hills, Yemen's ports, Java's plantations, Haiti's struggles, Brazil's vast fields, and Europe's cafes. Every empire left its mark, and every cup carried a shadow of history, both bright and bitter. And yet, the story of coffee was not finished. From colonial fields, it would soon enter the world of factories, instant powders, branded chains, and global commerce. The empire of beans would transform into the empire of brands. By the 20th century, coffee was no longer a luxury or a curiosity. It had become a daily rhythm, a thread woven into ordinary life. Factories ground and packaged it by the ton. In kitchens, tins of roasted beans and jars of instant granules sat ready, promising speed and convenience. Soldiers carried small packets to battlefields, workers poured steaming mugs before long shifts, and students brewed late into the night. Instant coffee was a marvel of modern industry. Invented in the early 1900s, it brought a new kind of accessibility. No need for careful roasting or brewing, only hot water and a spoon. During both World Wars, instant coffee became a soldier's companion, a taste of comfort in the chaos of the front lines. Its bitterness, softened with sugar and powdered milk, fueled armies and reminded them of home. But coffee did not stop evolving. After the war years, new rituals emerged. Espresso machines hissed in Italian cafes, filling cups with rich, concentrated shots. The culture of the barista spread outward, inspiring cappuccinos, lattes, and macchiatos. By the late 20th century, global chains like Starbucks turned coffee into both a beverage and an identity. Cafes were no longer just places to drink. They became places to sit with a laptop, to meet friends, to linger for hours with a single cup. The cafe became, once again, a kind of public living room, echoing those first cave carne centuries before. Today, coffee is everywhere, in convenience stores, in workplace kitchens, in artisanal shops that roast beans with scientific precision. It has become both ordinary and extraordinary, the simple drip pot in a quiet home, and the hand-poured single-origin brew prepared with glass kettles and thermometers. It has grown across continents: Brazil, Vietnam, Colombia, Ethiopia, each region imprinting its soil and climate into the flavour of the bean. And yet, behind every cup, old questions remain. How do we balance pleasure with fairness? The plantations that once thrived on slavery now face modern challenges: fair wages, sustainable farming, the shadow of climate change threatening fragile crops. Many consumers today seek out fair trade labels, organic certifications, or specialty roasters who know the farmers by name. Coffee has become a mirror of global awareness, a reminder that what we drink ties us to people and places far beyond our sight. Still, coffee keeps its intimacy. A morning ritual before the day begins, a break at work, cup in hand, staring out the window, a late-night companion, warm in the quiet hours. Each sip is both ancient and new, as familiar as the smell of home, yet carrying echoes of shepherds in Ethiopia, of mystics in Yemen, of philosophers in London. And as we look to tomorrow, coffee continues to reinvent itself. Cold brew in tall glasses, nitro coffee poured like beer, smart machines that can brew at the press of a button. Perhaps one day, beans will grow in places we cannot yet imagine, cultivated in labs or greenhouses to withstand shifting climates. But no matter how it changes, one thing remains constant: that simple pause, the warmth in your hands, the slow inhalation of fragrance before the first sip. So tonight, as you settle into rest, imagine the long journey contained in something as small as a cup. From wild berries on Ethiopian hillsides to the cafe on your corner, coffee has travelled through centuries, empires, and countless lives to meet you here. Our journey with coffee has reached its end, though the cup in your imagination still rests warmly in your hands. We have followed its trail from wild red cherries in Ethiopian hillsides to the sacred halls of Yemeni mystics, from lively Ottoman coffeehouses to European cafes alive with debate, from colonial plantations to the morning routines of today. Now, as you rest, let the story soften in your thoughts. The world outside grows quiet, and so too does the tale. Each sip of coffee is a small connection to centuries past, yet in this moment you need not think of time or trade or history, only of calm, of warmth, and of stillness. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, as though inhaling the faint aroma of roasted beans drifting through the night. The story lingers, but your body grows heavy, your mind drifts, and sleep comes closer with every breath. And tomorrow, when the sun rises and you lift a real cup once more, you will know that you hold not only a drink, but a history, one that has travelled the world to meet you. Good night.